Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Nick Lopez. I'm a Missouri Humanities Program Coordinator and Marine Corps veteran. Welcome to Beyond the Frontlines, Veterans in the Humanities, a podcast focusing on military veterans who are active in the humanities and arts. We are thrilled to launch this podcast and hope to foster difficult conversations on military service that bridge the gap of understanding between veterans and civilians, because a healthy veteran is a stable and engaged member of our community, which makes your neighborhood stronger. This podcast is brought to you by Missouri Humanities. Missouri Humanities is a statewide nonprofit that explores history, civics, and culture through community partnerships and public programming. Our guests for episode 1 are two veterans who I consider mentors and friends, H.C. Palmer and George Pettigrew. H.C. Palmer is a retired medical doctor and poet and was a battalion surgeon with the First Infantry Division during the American War in Vietnam. His poetry has appeared in New Letters, Kansas Matters, 21st Century Writers on the Sunflower State, University Press of Kansas, War, Literature and the Arts, and Verse Daily. His book of poems, Feet of the Messenger, was a finalist for the Balcones Poetry Prize. George is a Navy veteran of the Vietnam era. He states during his enlistment, his worldview was broadened through the travels and experiences gained in service, leading to a greater appreciation of humanities and culture. Now he is a certified oral storyteller, specializing in the history of the Buffalo Soldiers and the contributions of African Americans in the Army. Currently, George chairs the Frontier Museum of the United States Army Foundation. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking out the time. I'd like to start our conversation today on both of your experiences serving our country, and we're going to start with HC. HC, so you were drafted your first year of residency at KU Medical Center. What was that process like? What emotions did you and your family go through at that time? I think most of us probably imagine the draft during the Vietnam War was the enlisted lower class Americans. But here you are, a medical student, college graduate. What was that like?
Well, the war hadn't started when we were drafted. They started drafting doctors for the American War in Vietnam in April of 1955, or 65, 1965. And they drafted 1,500 doctors in April, 1,500 in May, 1,500 in June, 1,500 in July. And then in August, they claimed that a fishing boat off the coast of Vietnam had attacked an American destroyer, and the Congress declared war on Vietnam. So I was in a doctor's draft only that took place until the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And then they opened up the draft to everybody. But truthfully, as they drafted 8,000 or 9,000 doctors to fill in the peacetime blanks in the divisions and the hospitals before they declared the war.
Interesting. Okay. And so, how did you feel about being drafted? And what was your family's emotions? Were you a naturally patriotic family? Was it a war that you disagreed with?
Well, I didn't know about what the war was about. I grew up in World War II. I was 6 years old when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and everybody was patriotic. You know, my dad was a coach, and guys that he had coached were getting drafted and hauled off to the Pacific or to Europe, to one of the two fronts. And some of them were killed, and they were guys I idolized as a kid, you know, football players and basketball players. And so then there was the Korean War, which we knew nothing much about, but I think was a war that we needed to fight to protect the South Koreans, or it wouldn't be there today if it wasn't for them. And then along comes this war, and we have no idea why all of us doctors are being drafted when there's no war. Then we found out there was a war in August, 4 months after we were drafted.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you're from the Flint Hills of Kansas, close by. What was your first impression when you got to Vietnam?
We went over in a troop ship from World War II, and it took us about 4 weeks to get there. And we got on LSTs, all of us doctors and hospital corps, and then there was some of the division were with us too. And the LSTs went up on the sand at Vung Tau, a vacation area down in South Vietnam, and they put the front down, and we all walked on and said, "What are we doing here?"
For folks that don't know what an LST is, can you describe that to us?
Well, it's the landing ship that they use to carry troops, like in Omaha Beach, where they'd run up to close to the beach as they get, put the front down, and guys would run up. So then we got on C-130s and flew to the Benoit Air Base near Saigon, and that was the division headquarters for the First Infantry Division, who I served for.
Were you writing during this time while you're at Vietnam or before Vietnam? Did any of that writing influence your work today? If not, when did you start writing and writing poetry?
I didn't start writing poetry till a friend of mine published a book about the war and about he and I both being in it. And then I thought, he's feeling good about doing this, and he's getting his story out. And that's what we do. We all tell stories. So I started then as well, and sent some stories out and had some moderate success. And then I turned to poetry about 1990s, and I've been doing that since. But a lot of it is war poetry, and I don't find it hard to write it. I find it the challenge is to make it readable, and so people, once they read the first line, want to finish it.
Great. And so you've brought a piece for us to read today, Bird Hunting in the Tall Grass.
Sure.
Will you please go ahead and read that for us?
Yeah, let me tell you just a bit about it.
Okay.
I've been home.
Show us the book.
I've been home from Vietnam. I got home in July, and bird hunting is about the 1st of November. So I went back to the Flint Hills, and I was at Fort Riley, which was in the Flint Hills. And I really hadn't thought much about the war. I thought about how glad I was to be home. But then I shot a little bird, a quail. My dog pointed it. I shot it, picked it up, and I hit the bird dead center. And mostly the little quail was blood and feathers. There wasn't even anything you eat. And I picked it up, and then I couldn't get the blood and feathers off my hand. And I immediately thought of a patient I had, a soldier who was shot in the lower abdomen. I'm holding pressure on his arteries down there to try to keep him from bleeding to death, and how hard it was to get the threads of that, his fatigues and the blood off my hand. So this was the first poem I wrote. It's called Bird Hunting the Tall Grass. And of course the Flint Hills is a tall grass prairie. That's what it, and then we had elephant grass in Vietnam that was even taller than that. So there's 2 tall grasses. Bird hunting the tall grass. Shot at close range, the little hen has come apart. Her feathers, wet with her blood, cling to my fingers. I probe the femoral artery where fragments of the sergeant's fatigues penetrate the wound. And after it's over, and for a long time, I pick up my fingers, threads in congealed blood. On my knees beside the spring creek, I wash the feathers away. So that's a flashback in the middle. And that's what started me.
Mm-hmm. I think the line that sticks out to me the most is that end where you state that you're on your knees. And so in that moment, for people that they know what PTSD, the definition on paper is, what is it like when you're in that moment? You can't get those feathers and that blood off your hands, and you have that flashback. What is your physical reaction, your emotions? What is that like? Can you kind of describe that for them?
Well, the feathers and blood came off in the spring creek, and that was a relief to get that off. And I remember drying my hand on my thigh of my hunting pants, and but what it was like was all the way home, driving home from there back to Kansas City. I thought about, boy, that's a story. It's a poem. It's a story, and it was fun to get it out. And it's fun to get rid of those. Just the fact you get rid of them, and it gets you rid of the actual fatigues and the blood from the soldier that was killed. And so I said I should do more of this. Maybe who knows what'll come out.
So you like that releasing kind of, you could describe it as like releasing angst.
No, I describe it as opening up a new book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And with a lot of stories that I haven't told yet. Here now we're 60 years later after that. And although I had a lot of time to think about it, and I look at it I don't look at it from my personal angle so much as why are we at war? Why in the heck did we go to war? Now that poem, that time when during World War II, we knew exactly why we were at war. Our neighbors' sons were getting killed, but we've never known why we went to war, really, in Vietnam. And I call it the American War in Vietnam, not the Vietnam War. I find most influenced, most inspired by being at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I have friends there. My closest friend was a battalion surgeon was a surgeon with Special Forces, and they'd fly him out to all the little Special Forces camp whenever they would get overrun. And he's written a ton about it, and he encouraged me to keep writing, and we've kept close. And matter of fact, I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about stuff like this. But so the fact that I did write that little poem, and he read it, and he said, "You got to write, and you got to tell your story," and that's essentially what writing is, telling stories. Yeah.
What's it like having, now you bring that up, and your friend who encouraged you to write, what's it like having that kind of community? What's that support like for you, or maybe for other veterans that maybe are looking for that camaraderie or that community like they had when they were serving?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Of course, he and I were community before. We're close, even closer now, but that's what inspired me to start the Veterans Writers Program. We did it originally with the church, and we found that we couldn't talk about the things we needed to talk about or write about the things we needed to write about. So we went to the Writers' Place in Kansas City, and then to the Kansas City Public Libraries, where we've been for a dozen or so years.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that, your story with us, HC. We're going to pivot to George here. Did you have any reactions or anything from the poem that HC read, George?
Well, yes, I did. They were guttural, because my imagination is as much as I can use to even simulate the experience, because for me, I was one of the most fortunate people to actually enlist during the Vietnam era. I never saw, nor did I ever have a bullet pass my head. And this is very uncommon, because I've worked with and I know so many people that have had lifelong trauma from their experiences. And me, I was on an LST. As a matter of fact, that was my first assignment in the Navy, was on board an LST. So yeah, we would take you in, drop you off, and we'd go out and eat hot food. But I also had an opportunity to play basketball against NATO nations on a goodwill tour. And that's what it was. We were fighting out west, but we were trying to create goodwill and keep it high in the East or over in Europe. So I did get to play that for 7 months, and we were highly successful. We lost our first game to the South England champs. For the remainder of that 7 months, we never lost another game. Of course, they weren't good at basketball. They were better at soccer, and we were no good at soccer, so we chose the right game. Other than that, I did have the opportunity to experimentally fly at that time, the world's first hydrofoil gunboat, the USS Tucumcari. And it's now morphed into an entire class of ships that we were, of course, the first. And flying that thing was one of the greatest thrills in my life. So I don't have the traumatic experience. I have a very, to me, glorious experience as you said in the introduction, that it was going into these different countries. And at first I'm taking photos to remember and show things. And then it came to me that if I lose those photos, I'll lose that memory. So put the camera down and observe. And that's when it all changed for me. Because when I started observing people, when I would just sit and people watch, when I would eat what they'd eat, go where they go, and I even noticed the difference in the shoes they wore and the shoes we wore, it began to open up a whole lot more about not the difference in people, but how common they were. And that set me off on a different trail altogether.
Great. I want to go a little bit more deeper into your experience while you served. So recently, Missouri Humanities hosted Percival Everett, the author of James, at the Heartland Book Festival. And during that conversation, Percival talked about the Black experience and how he didn't like that word because it took too broad of a stroke on that Black experience, because each person has a different experience. So what was that like for you enlisting in the Vietnam War and in the Navy, or during the Vietnam War and in the Navy, as a young Black man who was also educated and was in college at the time?
The Navy had a quiet reputation of being one of the least friendly when it comes to race relations at that time. This was 1969. And I recall that the very first time I was on board that LST, the Wood County, I was assigned to a 4-hour watch. You go to the quarterdeck, you wear your little uniform, and you just stand there for 4 hours, make sure nobody leaves or comes on board. And that watch was from midnight till 4 in the morning. The watch captain was a guy that was, of course, he was senior to me, but we were both enlisted. And he told me it was a white man's Navy. We must have spent the next 3 hours and 40 minutes talking about that. I don't think he ever changed my mind, I'm sure, and I'm probably never changed his, but my point was, as long as we receive the same pay, wear the same clothes, and do the same job, how is it that it's different from you than it is for me? And I took my position and I kept it. I stood my ground. I never relinquished that. I never would put myself in a position that I thought was less than I was worth. So that led me into some strange places too. I became a racial awareness facilitator trainer. I became what they had then was WIN, W-I-N, which meant women in the Navy. And the job was to facilitate to the sailors that women are going to be involved all across the Navy, not in little segments and little specialties, but they're going to be on board ships and everything else. So I won't say it was resistance. I will say that I just didn't bend and I didn't give. And it led me into being ombudsman for CB Command in Virginia, in Norfolk, Virginia. It led to a lot of things because I wasn't compromising about that. I would compromise about some things, but it wasn't going to be about my worth, my value, or my self-impression. I never gave up, never gave in.
So
I was hard-headed.
that hard-headedness, or I'm going to use the word resistance, but resistance to racism and the will to stand up for maybe others. As you say, you worked with the WIN program. Did you learn that at home, or was that something that you learned in your community in Arkansas? Can you remind me, what was the small town that you lived in Arkansas?
Pine Bluff, Arkansas.
Pine Bluff, that's right, yes. Is that something that you learned there? Or?
Yeah, I would say it was born into me because my parents were like that, of course. My mother was a free thinker and my father he absorbed everything he put his hands on. He read constantly and never forgot a thing. He had that kind of memory, which I don't. But in that small town, there was always a population of about 50-50 black and white. So if I see one like me, I see one that was white. We had a small college there. It was a land-grant college, the second oldest university in the state of Arkansas. And that was in my hometown. So I'm used to people in neckties and dresses, and they all had PhDs. So this is common. This is the neighborhood I grew up in. Intelligent, educated people. And why would I have any other? If I see one black person, I see one white person, and because it's that divide, even though they lived on different parts of town. But I knew that we stood equal too, just visually, because you get your own world view by the time you are very young. And mine was built on that. Educated people that, they were all professional in appearance and in their lives. They did plenty of things for us as the children of the community, by showing us etiquette and all these other, and training us, developing us for the world. So, I never had any reason to think any less of me than I did of anybody else. And I never put anybody above me either. They may do something that I don't do, but as a human, no.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of what Percival was talking about at the book festival. Even though you are from a small town in Arkansas, people may assume something, but it sounds like your community was very...
An oasis.
Yes,
it was
very
an
much,
oasis, particularly for black people in Jim Crow South.
Yes.
This was very unique. It was entirely unique in the state of Arkansas for any town that size. So, I was born with it. I was born into it. I grew up with it. And it was just me. I never thought about it again. You couldn't convince me otherwise.
Now, later in your life, after you served in the Navy, you found out that your great-grandfather was a Buffalo Soldier.
Yes.
And now you're involved in the local Buffalo Soldier chapter. You're oral storyteller, and you do, I don't know if you call them reenactments.
I don't reenact.
Okay. You get dressed in your Buffalo Soldier uniform, and you tell stories and inform folks of that history. What does that mean to you now, to be able to spread those stories of your family, of your ancestors to the community all across the state of Missouri and also Kansas?
Kansas, Missouri, and throughout the region. It means a lot to me because, yes, my mother for 40 years was detailing all of the family's history, my father's side as well as hers. And I asked her once, who's the most interesting person you found in this 40 years of research, which incidentally took her to Washington, D.C. The flag flown over the Capitol was brought down, folded, and handed to her in honor of her grandfather, my great-grandfather. And the House and the Senate recognized him as something I'm sure he never heard in his life, was him being referred to as a patriot. But in the resolutions, they did call him a patriot, and they said it was Buffalo Soldier Day in his honor, Isaac Johnson. Well, I took on all of this because she left all of her research to me in her will. And so I was still working, and knew I had all this material, but I wasn't doing much with it. And finally, it was just that I've got to know. And you two guys are poets. I'm a prose fella. So I went to writing, and that led me to telling the story. So I've been for, I think, 5 or 6 years. I was with Humanities Speakers Bureau, Humanities Council Speakers Bureau. And it's led me to the most amazing things that I thought nothing about, I thought never possible. Because to me, it's rewarding that I'm able to give information to people that I assume when they come to see me, they want to hear what I have to say. So I'm not standing in front of any hostile crowds. And I'm able then to tell them this history, but I like to take the history that they know. Custer, for example, or any of the other names that would Bill, Wild Bill Hickok. You can take the names that we know and parallel them to the stories that they don't know. And that's why I find the greatest value, because people can relate to, at the same time, this was a happening here in Dodge City, for example. These guys were out on the prairie making certain that the settlers would be safe from Dodge City West. So it's rewarding, and it's I find it more interesting because it's real. And telling something that's real, that's fascinating to me, is better than imagination and the creation of someone that they come up with fiction. So I write a historical fiction, but I speak as a certified oral storyteller. I speak only about factual history.
Yeah, we've had conversations, you and I, about going out and talking about the Buffalo Soldiers in these rural communities. I think we talked about, you spoke with is the Sons of the Confederates.
Yes, I did.
But you went into it with some doubts, but you came out of it and you made connections.
Yeah.
And what's that like to be able to do that? And maybe, you have doubts and you come out of it and you think to yourself, I'm glad I did that.
In 1 year, I spoke to the Sons of the American Revolution, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and the Sons of Union Veterans, and what they call SOBs, which is the sons of both. And going into my thinking up my program delivery, going into the Confederate meeting, I was wondering how or what to tell, and it came to me: tell the same damn story you've always told. Tell them the same story. Don't shift. And I walked in and I told them exactly what I would have told any other audience. And it was so well received that it was my confidence then was rewarded, because I see that people want to know. And when they want to know, and when you can relate it to something they do understand, they get something out of it. And when I see the eyes open up and you reach that aha moment where somebody says, I never knew that. Oh, really? That's my reward. That's where I get my energy.
Yeah.
So
It gives you a little bit of some hope.
that's my reward, because I used to think that I wanted Black children to know more about their history. And I see now that it's more valuable that everybody understands, because that's how you can build a relationship that's worthy of the effort. Because if I hope for Black young kids to understand this, but then the rest of the population does not, that's not doing these kids in an isolation, not doing them much good. So I am all for everyone knowing the same story as much as I can possibly deliver.
Yeah. Speaking of that story, you brought excerpt from a prose piece that you wrote that you talk about your great-grandfather and a story about his service. Could you go ahead and share that with us?
Yeah, this is entitled Frontiers Old and New, and it is written for a magazine that's coming out. It's the coming out this month. And this is just a small excerpt, but the story, Frontiers Old and New, is about Fort Leavenworth, the current museum that's there, that's been there since the 30s. And the one that, as you mentioned, I'm chair of a foundation, the Frontier Museum of the United States Army Foundation. We raise funds to construct, and once constructed, it is a gift to the United States Army, to Fort Leavenworth, and I consider to the American people. So I wrote this article, and in this article, it's just a brief part of it. It says, on July 5th or 6th in 1867, my great-grandfather was detailed to escort mail from Fort Harker, Kansas to Fort Union, New Mexico, along the Santa Fe Trail. Being completely illiterate, the messages contained in the letters meant nothing to him. His duty was to transport the mail to Fort Union without fail. 4 miles west of Lyons, Kansas, in Rice County, his detail came under attack at Cow Creek Crossing on the Santa Fe Trail. The crossing was a popular attack point for the Kiowa and Cheyenne that summer. The troops successfully repelled their attackers.
I think that's a great story. how does that make you feel to know those stories of your great grandfather? To know that he served with bravery, courage, and honor. Does that help guide your principles today? Now that you've learned it when you're older about his service.
It does, because I'll be honest with you, the narrative of America through my life wasn't always one that included me. I didn't see myself in a lot of the narratives about this country and its history. And then when I see that not only was he here, and that he went from being enslaved in Montgomery, Alabama, to being a professional soldier for the first time in his country's history. He was one of the very first. Then, yeah, it gives me ownership in the history of this country that I thought I never had before. And I'm very proud of what he did. He went on and learned to read and to write. He even taught school for a while after service. But I know now more about the resilience and about his fortune, extreme, because as we know, there were 3.5 to 4 million enslaved people that were released from that enslavement in 1865. But less than 5,000 of them got into the Army as professional soldiers, not as volunteers, and not as U.S. colored troops. They were then United States regulars for the first time in the country's history. It gave me a lot. It gave me a lot of pride.
And you were telling us before we started the show was that today is the anniversary of the Battle of Island Mound. That is actually right near us, outside of Butler, Missouri.
It's about 60, 65 miles southeast of here. And the importance of the Battle of Island Mound, and please look it up, because that was the first time in American history, even though we have always had Black people represented in every war that this country has ever gotten itself into, and we're pretty good at finding wars. We can do that. But it was there at Island Mound, west of Butler, Missouri, that Black troops went in for the first time in the Civil War, and they were outnumbered 2-1, but they were victorious. And they were untested, and they really weren't even sanctioned by Lincoln or his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. They said no. But we had a Senator Jim Lane from Kansas that was a recruiter for Kansas that said, you guys go down there and take care of that problem, run them out. And it was the 29th of October that the skirmish really did occur. And through my studies, I found that what was unexpected was that a former slave from just months ago would stand up and fight a white man with a gun. That wasn't supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. And these guys being outnumbered on foot against rebel guerrillas that were on horseback and very experienced, they were not supposed to win. But they actually performed in the way that they had been trained. Mm-hmm. And they were successful. Mm-hmm. That was the first Kansas Colored Volunteer Infantry. They went on from there to other battles, and they went to Honey Springs, same situation, outnumbered. And they stood their ground, and they were victorious. Mm. So this creates a narrative now that, wait a minute, we can't really believe that Black people don't have the capacity, the wisdom or the courage to fight, that they won't point a gun at a white man. They will drop the gun and run. But these guys didn't. Mm-hmm. They never did. Mm. And so they're now, in my world, they're heroes. Yeah. And today marks the day that they won that decisive battle, the first one at Island Mound.
Well, I hope people that hear this, they look it up, because it is a powerful story. It is. Yes. Very much.
And it changed America.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about the president right now. Between the three of us, so the three of us, we've all volunteered on the planning team of the Kansas City Veterans Right. At the time when I joined, it was Kansas City Veterans Writing Team, but the name has changed. HCU were the original founder of this group, so we kind of owe it all to you. What brought you the idea to start this, and what was your goal at the beginning?
Well, what brought me the idea was that there were some very successful Vietnam veteran writers like Tim O'Brien and who had gone around and veterans that had come to hear him back east have then started their groups. So, and then the U.S., actually the federal government, through I can't remember which agency, but they started a promotion to get these things started throughout the country. And so I could walk in with a piece of paper to the people I had to work with, which was a church here in town, a big church, and say, we need to do this. And they said, I guess we do. And we started, but we didn't stay there long because we were constrained by some things they wanted us to do and not do. So we moved on, as I explained earlier, to the writer's place. And so it was because there were successful writers groups, veterans writers groups, especially up in Massachusetts and up in New England. That's why, so we thought we'd start one here. And so we invited a lady to come and talk. Her name was Rita Brock, and she talked about moral injury from war. And that got us a bunch right there, the people that we started with. So 3 or 4 of those people are still.
Can you give us not a lot of people know what moral injury is. They think of veterans, they think of war, they go straight to post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us, in your own words, what moral injury is?
Well, moral injury is always a betrayal. And you make up betrayed yourself if you're raised with the 10 Commandments or something like that, which really one is only important as love your neighbor as yourself. And so moral injury is you recall something that in war, moral injury in war is you recall you usually go to war with some morals. And back, in the World War II, almost everybody went to church before World War II. So they go there and pretty soon they're killing people. And that's against the rules, right? Or Jesus wouldn't do that, right? Or Buddha wouldn't do that, or any of those. And so then you live with that. Gee, I killed somebody. And it's different than guilt, like where if you're a Catholic, you can go do 10 Hail Marys or something and you're forgiven. No, it's not that. It's shame. I actually killed a human being. Mm-hmm. And Tim O'Brien writes about it in his book. He killed a young 14-year-old guy, or no, this was an 18 or 19-year-old guy, and ambushed him and killed him, and then went out and got stuff out of his pocket and saw he was a writer. And some of the stuff he had written, pictures of him and his family, his wife and his 2 kids. And he said, what have I done? What have I done? Now, the other part of moral injury is because it's not just guilt where you can go get forgiven of your guilt. It's a shame. It's shame. It's shame you can't live with. After the Vietnam War, the suicide rate in America went up like from about 5 points over and those people were veterans that were back with stories that they couldn't tell, they couldn't live with. And they said, I can't do this anymore. And especially, killing children, or you in Vietnam, you'd shoot a guy you think is a Viet Cong, and he's bringing him in, and he doesn't even have pubic hair yet. He's 11 years old. But the government has you stack them up and take pictures for a body count because we want to prove we're killing more of them than they are of us. And then that means we're winning the war. Mm-hmm. And these are things that are deeper than guilt. They're shame. And they don't go away. And many of the people can't deal with it, and they kill themselves. So part of the intent of our group, although I'm not sure it ever happened, was to get them to tell their story and talk about it and see if just by telling their story and bringing it out in the open, if they can learn to deal with it. But moral injury is, and you can have moral injury from something. You could have moral injury from being raped. but you're violated. You know, that's moral injury. That's you weren't even the perpetrator. And in truth, in Vietnam, none of us were the perpetrators. We were sent there and told that these Asian people were gooks, slopes, and dehumanized them to the point where you could kill them and move on. And then when you finally figure out you've been duped by your own government, I'll read it. I have a chance to read it. It's from a movie called Conspiracy.
Go ahead, yes.
And it's about World War II, and it's about the Jews. What are you going to do with all these dead Jews at your concentration camps? You can't bury them all, you know. So they've had built furnaces to burn the bodies, right? But this came from the German government, and this is Kenneth Branagh, the great British actor, was playing Reinhard Heydrich, one of Hitler's main people. The name of the movie is Conspiracy, and I recommend it to everybody if you want to know what moral injury is. And part of the big part of moral injury is betrayal. If somebody sends you to war and it's a bad war, you have no business there. You've been betrayed by the highest form, the people in the top part of our own government. And there's nothing you can do about it. So here you are, you did what they told you, you napalmed a village, and no telling how many men, women, children, babies you killed. So it all comes from somebody betraying you. And in wars, except for World War II and the Korean War, I think we've been betrayed by people in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So Kenneth Branagh, as Richard Reinhard Heydrich says, this guy says, well, why are we there anyway? You know, he's talking about Poland and how many Jews they killed, and they're stacked up. He said, Branagh said, politics is a nasty game. I think soldiering requires the discipline to do the unthinkable, and politics requires the skill to get somebody else to do the unthinkable for you. So you're betrayed. That says the betrayal as good as anything I've read. And you've been betrayed by somebody you trust not to do that.
But you've also been forced to do these things.
Yes.
Because laws are going to punish you if you don't.
Yeah, that's part of the betrayal.
It's a draft. You are called, you're going to serve, and you've been taught how patriotic that is.
Yeah, and you're killing bugs. You know, you're not killing human beings, you're killing bugs.
I recently had this similar conversation of the dehumanization, you know, because obviously different war, the Operation Iraqi Freedom. But I recalled in training, you know, the targets are shaped like Arabs or, you know, Iraqis, and, you know, they have their turban, and, you know, it's unfortunate, but that's war, right? I mean,
well, if you want to win the war,
yes,
you have to hate who you're shooting.
Yes, correct. So, but to get back on the subject of the writing group, I'll tell you also that you said you don't know if you made a difference with the group. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it wasn't for that group that you started. So you got at least one person. So
I know of more. I know of more.
George, you came to the group a little bit later, and we were thankful for that. You've made a great, awesome contribution to that group. There was a lot of things that we couldn't have done without you. Being a part of that, what was it like to see or hear a veteran or a family member open up and tell their story, whether through poetry, prose, or maybe just a conversation you had with somebody from the group?
It was, as I say, it was different from my own military experience, but I have an open mind, and I appreciate curiosity in myself. I want to know more. I have one particular friend. He is president of the local Buffalo Soldier chapter, and for 50 years, he never told a soul, not children, not wife, not mother or father. He told no one anything about his experiences there. 50 years he carried this in himself, and it was a torture for 50 years because you don't sleep right. You know, what Nick was talking about earlier was what actually is a trigger. which was the blood on your hands and the feathers, was a trigger to the PTSD. And so there were triggers. One for him was a certain helicopter. If he hears that sound, it takes him back.
It's a Huey.
Yeah, everybody knows that sound. But
And he was in the Vietnam.
through this,
American War.
oh yeah, 4 Bronze Stars for valor in combat in Vietnam, in the field. So I've never met anybody like this guy to be as normal as he seems to be. He's gone through hell. And through this group, he started to write. And I recall when he called me and he says, I'm going to have a Zoom call with my family. Nieces, nephews, grandkids, everybody.
Wow.
I'm going to have them all on the Zoom call, and I want you there, George. And I said, okay. So he opened up and told them stories for the first time. And I was amazed. I sat there just amazed. And then he wrote about it. And now it's he hasn't changed as a person, but I can sense in him, since I've known him a good while now, I can see in him that he isn't quite like he was, even though, as I say, he was a very normal person, but a lot of the tension has lowered.
He seems lighter.
Lighter, thank you. And so I know this story closely and personally, and it's remarkable the work. And if you can't get everybody to do what that particular person did, you help them as much as you can. But I think most important, and when I came on board because I was an oral storyteller. You guys were all written. You were prose and poetry. And I knew that where I fit in, if you're going to write, you're going to have to read it. You're going to have to present it. You're going to have to sell it. And telling the story is what will make that happen. That's what you need to do to make your work go forward. So I thought that was my charge in the group, was to help with that part of it. And we did do the Readers Theater, which was great, because these same people that had these issues before wrote about them and then stood in front of an audience, many of them for the first time, and read their work to an audience. This was phenomenal. This was going from being locked in your mind for 50 years to standing and sharing. And that happened to a lot of them. Yeah, and I think that's what really mattered about that program. There were some that didn't do as well, and some did much better. But the point of it is, I think all helped mostly because what I found with HC and with you were there too. I was there 7 years. I am there 7 years. Was that the people found that they were in an environment, in a group where they felt not isolated, but insulated. That they were able to release that pent up torture. Personal torture. Safely.
That's
yeah. That there was trust in that room.
Everybody shared the same experiences in different
ways.
But it was a trust, yeah.
And it allowed folks to find something that they had not found before, because Vietnam, in my impression, was probably the most ill-treated veterans to return home from an overseas war. I say overseas because during the Civil War, there was a whole bunch of mess, one to the other. But from overseas, no veterans have suffered so much there, then come home and maybe not receive appreciation for at least them having done their duty. As HC was saying, duty could be twisted, it could be wrong-minded, but these folks went and did it nonetheless. And those that were fortunate enough to come home were then mistreated again. So they didn't want to talk about it.
That's what I read about the politicians.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so they betrayed all these people, and instead of the Americans, a large group of them anyway, didn't blame Nixon or Johnson or McNamara. They blamed the soldier himself, and they called him baby killers.
Yeah.
When
Very cruel.
unlike my trip over to Vietnam, I flew back in a Pan American jet to San Francisco, and I got my DD-214, which is laying right there on my desk, my discharge papers, and the guy hands it to me. Back then, they didn't have copying machines, so I think there were 7 carbons. You know, he pulled off the last one and gave it to me, and he says, "By the way, Doc," he says, "if you leave the base tonight, be sure to wear civvies, or somebody's going to spit on you, and they might throw stuff at you."
Mm. That's sad. Yeah, unfortunate. So after these last 14 years of running this group HC, has anything changed you? Opened your mind? What's something that sticks out to you that you've learned from this group?
Well, I've learned that people that have stories like ours can bond, and I've learned that one of the questions we had when we started was, well, is everybody going to clam up? You know, because they haven't talked about these things before, and some people got a little bit out, some people got a lot out, but I think. And those numbers weren't high, you know, maybe over a period of the 14 years or so since we started at that church, we've had a total of 50 people come through, in and out, in and out. At first we had Korean vets, and then they died. They were pretty old, you know, 1951. And then we had Vietnam vets, and then we had some Iraqi, Afghanistan vets. And now, for lack of a new war, which we may have anyway, the numbers have gradually dwindled down. But yeah, that's. I think that we did a good work, and even if we only helped one person, and that one person didn't put the gun in their mouth and pull the trigger,
We never lost one
we never that we know of.
that we know of.
Yeah.
But also, we had a lot of people that came out of that published. Many of them published for the first time. And so these were people, if you imagine this, that folks come from a point where they don't talk about it. They don't even want to think about it. They want to avoid the triggers that will bring it on. These folks went ahead and published.
In other words, they told the world.
Yeah.
Published. They stood in front of a crowd.
They not only wrote it
That's
out,
true,
they not only
yeah.
spoke to the group, they put it out there in the world. And that was so much tremendous growth in some individuals. And most of them, I think, everyone I can recall benefited from that program. Some more than others, but certainly a lot of successes in that story.
All right, so last question for both of you. Not a lot of people today know what the humanities are. You say, I work in the humanities, automatically, what's the definition of the humanities? But why do you think it's important to provide the humanities to the veteran community, and why is it important for us to work to bridge that gap between veteran and civilian? And I'll let you go first, HC.
Well, our part, as far as humanities, it's a very tiny part of the humanities, because the humanities are really going back and reading Achilles in Vietnam, or reading Achilles and Odysseus and Montaigne and all of those writers and philosophers. And but we were very focused, but it's still humanities. And the humanities we don't teach anymore in university, certainly not in high school. But we had to take a philosophy course or something like that when I was in college, and now it's not important anymore, you know. But it is important, and people have been to war, and people that write about war know that literature is part of that. So I think Missouri Humanities, Kansas, I believe, has some. I live in Kansas, but I've done everything with Missouri Humanities. And Kansas has humanities as well. And one of our teachers that came in for our sessions where we had Friday, Saturday, Ortolani has worked with the Kansas Humanities with veterans and writing, and actually gone out to towns and around like you do, George. And so I think nobody's going to do it if the humanities don't do it. Yeah,
That's true. I agree with all that. Humanities, it started unknowing to me. I was first semester in college, I took sociology, and they were talking about the San Blas Cunas. I had no idea what the hell it was. I went on to find out that they were in Panama. I ended up in the Navy going to Panama in that part. And I began to experience, and so for me, seeing something come off of a textbook page and become real gave me a tie that I had never known before. And that's when I started seeing the humanity all over, because humanity, base word is human. And if it was ology, it'd be study of.
yeah.
But I think that I think it's most important that humanity seeks to make certain that people do remember, that they don't forget, that they are aware of what matters in life. So humanities, along with so many other disciplines, is a great part of helping people be human and understanding the human nature.
That's right.
And if they can do that, then they'll get all that humanities can. And it opens up a person to see more than just themselves or the shell that they're in. And I think that's the value, because humanities is universal, no matter where you are.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, gentlemen, for doing this today.
Thank you.
There's no better way to do something that you're doing the first time, but with friends. Makes it a little easier on you. So I also want to thank HC and your wife, Val, for letting us invade your house and take up your space. But before we go, I just want to mention that on Veterans Day, we are releasing the 14th volume of Proud to Be, writing by American warriors. This is in partnership with Green Tower Press. Proud to Be is an anthology of poetry, fiction, essays, and photography by veterans and military-connected family members. Please go to our website for purchase options and to explore what other free programming we provide veterans at mohumanities.org/veterans. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you next time. Semper Fi.